Hey everyone, and welcome to SkillCapped. I'm the King Live, and today I have a video that I was actually really curious about myself. I've been in many situations recently because of the new act where it feels like players are genuinely just far better than me. Some of these lobbies in general just seem to be a little messed up, sometimes pairing me with actual Radiant players when I'm a low Immortal player level at my best. The experience that I'm generally having playing against these players is something similar that you've probably experienced before, where basically I'm not really able to hold any angles versus these guys. Pretty much anytime I try to hold an angle, it will basically result in those players who are better swinging out on me and killing me before I even realize. So this kind of raised the question to me, how do players get away with holding angles at higher ranks when everybody plays like this? How do you possibly hold these angles without dying? Well, I did some research, spent some time watching a lot of pro players and how they play their rounds, and I have a pretty good answer for you guys. So if you want to know how the pros manage to hold angles in Valorant without getting rolled, just stick around while we get into it. But before we do, let's introduce our question of the day, which is, which Valorant agent would be most likely to dump their entire life savings on Dogecoin? Cypher seems like he would be pretty early on the Dogecoin train. He's got to know all about crypto. Anyway though, let's get into the guide. Leave your replies in the comments down below. Now before we actually talk about anything, there are two really important concepts that you need to understand. Those two concepts are angle advantage and peeker's advantage. If you already know about these two things, awesome. Our videos are always timestamped, so feel free to skip to the next section down below. However, if you don't know about these things, then these are things that you need to know. The first concept is called angle advantage. This really refers to how perspective works in Valorant, or basically even real life as well. This is a really easy concept to understand once you know about it. So basically what you need to know is that if you're staring at a corner, if a player is further from that corner, he's going to see you before you see him. You can find extreme examples where you won't even be able to see the enemy player, but they will be able to see you. So basically what you need to know is that if you're holding an angle, generally you shouldn't be standing directly on the corner of it because it's possible they will be able to see your shoulder before you see them. Look at this picture for reference, understand this picture so that you don't get yourself killed by stupid stuff in the future. Moving on to the other concept, which is called peeker's advantage. This refers to a couple of things. The most common thing players mention and the most impactful thing has to do with latency. Basically, whenever you perform an action, there is a specified amount of time that it takes for your game to communicate to the server and then the server to communicate back to the other players. This is basically what your ping is. I'm not a huge tech guy and I'm not going to pretend to be. This is a very loose explanation of how peeker's advantage works. Basically what you need to know though as a player is that the reason it's referred to as peeker's advantage is because generally the player peeking an angle is going to have an advantage due to the fact that every action they make needs to be communicated to the server before the other player actually sees it. So basically, I swing and shoot you. I tell the server I shot you. The server says, yep, I shot you. And then the server tells you, oh, by the way, somebody swung you and shot you. Generally, the higher the ping, the more of an advantage you will have when peeking because it will take the server longer to communicate. And this is when it starts to really get past my understanding because, like I said, I'm not really much of a tech guy. Something that might surprise you to hear, though, is another factor that plays into peeker's advantage has to do with how your brain processes information. Basically, if you're prepared to swing a corner and take a gunfight, your brain is more prepared to react to that information, so you'll have a slight advantage. This is an interesting concept that a lot of players don't really mention with peeker's advantage because, let's be honest, the ping probably has a bigger impact. But you've all experienced it when you're holding an angle. Even if you know somebody's going to peek you, you don't really know when they're going to peek you. This is to the advantage of the peeker because they get to choose when they peek you and are prepared for the fight. And you could still prepare when you're holding the angle, but you're not going to know the exact moment it's going to take place, so you'll have to react to it. Anyway though, these are just two concepts that are important for understanding what we're going to be talking about going forward, so if you weren't familiar with them, now you are. Moving on to what you're all watching the video for though, so let's start talking about what I learned from watching professional players and how they generally play the game. Specifically, what I was looking for while watching these players is examples of them holding angles and how they get away with it when it's seemingly difficult for me. It's not like I have the worst reaction time in the world or even bad pre-aim, I'm just getting annihilated by these players every single time I try to hold an angle. So how do pros hold angles? Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you might sound weird at first, but the answer is on the surface kinda seems to be they don't. I spent a lot of time watching pro players on Twitch, and it was really hard to find standard examples of a pro just holding an angle. The key thing I want to point out here, though, is a standard example of holding an angle. And this is the first thing I want to talk about with many of these pro clips. Basically, on every single map, there are examples of angles that are considered pretty standard. The reason they are standard angles is because oftentimes, in theory, they're pretty safe angles to play. Angles that have a lot of cover behind them, angles that allow you to fall back if contested, both of these things sound pretty good. But for the same reason, because these angles are very good angles, they oftentimes are the first angles that enemies will aim at when coming around a corner. And remember back when we talked about peeker's advantage? Hopefully, now you'll see why this is a problem. Because if you're holding an angle that is generally the first place an enemy is going to aim when coming around a corner, that means that because of peeker's advantage, it's very likely this angle is going to get you killed. By understanding this, oftentimes I'll actually find myself outgunning players when they have operators on these angles because they're holding an angle that I'm very familiar with pre-aiming. And since peeker's advantage is a thing, I'm very likely to get the first shot off, even though on paper they should probably have the advantage with an operator. Now, another problem with holding standard angles is that generally this is the first point of contact as well, meaning that you're holding an angle that your teammates can't really help you from. And since at the top level, Valorant really is a game of angles, this can be a big problem. By holding this angle, you're basically preventing anybody on your team from setting up a crossfire with you, and you're instead saying, guys, hold my beer as I go for this solo peek. Therefore, rather than taking a solo peek, instead, it might be a better idea to hold an angle that would be more safely set up for a crossfire with your teammate and make it more difficult for the enemies to pick you off without exposing themselves to your teammates. And this is primarily what you'll see from these players, is that rather than holding any of these standard angles, they'll sit in a position that maybe gives the attackers more space to work with, but will inevitably result in them pushing up into a position where they will have to deal with enemies on two fronts, which is far more difficult to deal with than just taking 1v1s on a player standing in a common spot. Now take a look at this clip from Gares on Icebox and pay attention to what he exposes himself to and what angles he's peeking. He starts at the rounded nest on A site. A site on Icebox is pretty notorious for being an area with so many angles to worry about, and it's actually a very difficult site to hold, but by playing up a nest and not peeking out towards pipes or swinging out to take duels on players on belt, Sean is able to set up a crossfire with Jordan on back site behind him. Notice how once again, he's not just taking duels with players on belts or pipes to start the round, he's playing in a position that he has height advantage and letting the enemies push into a crossfire from a spot where they aren't likely to expect him. An example of a standard angle on Icebox would be something like this, and although it's the first point of contact on belt, this is actually a very risky position to play because nobody else on the site can really help you when you're taking this duel. But instead, in the position Sean is playing here, Jordan is back site, and as he takes these fights, he's already made contact with the enemies. So by the time that Sean actually does peek them, Jordan has already pulled their crosshairs down from this location, and he's able to pick up some really easy kills because of this. He's not just holding standard angles, he's holding angles that complement his teammates' location and playing off them. He's holding angles that are not going to get him killed 2 seconds into the round so that he can actually be a useful body on his team in the round. It goes deeper than this though, and it really depends on what agent you're playing on what angles you're capable of playing. For example, if you're an agent like Reyna or Jett, you're probably more inclined to hold off angles and look for duels more. Whereas if you're an agent like Cypher or Killjoy, you're going to be less inclined to take duels, especially on defense, because your utility provides a ton of value passively, and if you die, you'll be losing that value. Let's take a look at this clip from Aproto where he's playing Cypher in Showers on Bind. Notice how in this round, Aproto isn't really holding any angles himself because he doesn't really need to. He has a tripwire set up in Showers and he has a camera watching short. Both of these areas are covered. He doesn't really need to hold an angle to get info, he already has it. This is why agents like Reyna are going to have to position themselves differently than an agent like Cypher, because she physically has to gather info in different ways. She doesn't have the same tools available to her. Notice how rather than holding an angle though, Aproto is going to be playing off of his utility instead. Throughout this round, he's constantly throwing in jiggle peeks and taking a duel towards the Showers players and just looking for any sort of damage that he can get on them. He's not really over peeking, he's just looking to see if he can sneak in a quick pick on the enemy Sova, and by spamming him through his cage, he manages to do that. Because of his tripwire, he knew that nobody could have pushed up on him throughout the round, so he manages to adjust his pre-aim for the situation and grabs a kill through his cage. He wasn't just hard holding the angle, he was using peeker's advantage to take a quick duel, and then when he missed, he fell back. Notice how, again, he doesn't re-peek this angle because he knows that the enemies are aware of him now, but instead he pops his cage, and after they step into it, he spams where the enemies might be. If he re-peeks them dry, it could be a really bad idea and get him killed. This is why he pops his cage the second time rather than dry peeking a second time. He used his utility to his advantage to grab a kill, but you won't really catch him holding angles much as Cypher. He pretty much is always playing off his utility and using it to give him an advantage in duels. Let's take a look at an example for what it would look like to play an agent like Reyna instead though. Now, I'm going to be honest, there are actually no kills to be had in this clip, but I think it's still a really good example of the kind of positioning and holding angles that you'll more commonly see at this rank. Notice how Aproto starts out the round as Reyna holding an off angle outside of Cave. He's on top of the railing aiming towards Cave, anticipating that if any players push out, they're not going to expect him to be in such a weird off angle, and he could grab a kill and dismiss away towards safety. Once the Viper wall goes up, you'll see that he backs up to another position where he can see over the Viper wall and potentially look for any picks on players not expecting this. Now, unfortunately, he gets hit by a flash and annihilated by somebody pushing through backside, but this is generally the type of play I saw from players if they're going to look to hold an angle. They'd be holding an off angle where players would not expect them, even if it was just a subtlety of them holding the angle a little further from the standard angle. Notice how in this next clip, Gares once again is using an operator to watch tiles on ascent. Rather than playing directly where an enemy would aim when peeking catwalk though, he swings out a bit from the angle and holds a little bit wider. This is because, as we talked about before, if he's holding right on the angle, it's far more likely someone is going to swing out and one-tap him, but by holding just a little bit more out, it makes it a lot less likely. He also has his teleport already available, so if by chance they double swing him or he gets stuck in this corner, he can always TP towards safety. But after switching from this angle to watch the catwalk peek instead, Sean does something else, again subtle but interesting. He's holding a pretty standard angle once again, but while doing this with the operator, he decides he's going to crouch while holding this angle. And I felt it important to mention this in the video because this is part of the answer to the often asked question, is crouching bad in Valorant? There are times when crouching is bad, but this is an example of when crouching would be a good thing. Because right now, Sean is holding a very common angle that if I'm swinging around catwalk, I'm absolutely going to be pre-aiming at. However, I'm likely going to be aiming at head level, and Sean recognizes this. So by crouching, he will throw off the enemy's pre-aim and hopefully get the first shot off on them with the operator. These sorts of things really make a big difference at the top level when everyone has near perfect crosshair placement all of the time. And that's why if you're holding a common angle like this, you want to make sure that you're doing something to give yourself an advantage. Whether it's jiggle peeking the angle to use peeker's advantage, or crouching like Sean does in this clip, or something else that we're about to talk about, which is pre-firing. If you're unfamiliar, pre-firing is a tactic in which you shoot before you see the target on your screen. This is basically all based on timing, and whether that timing is a visual cue of something else or an audio cue, generally you're pre-firing an angle for a reason. This is something that I saw pretty commonly if a player was going to choose to hold a common angle, is that they would quickly pre-fire where the player would peek them from and then fall back from the location, knowing that it was probably likely that they were going to return fire if they missed, or if they hit, they would probably at least try to get the trade kill. Notice in this clip, Gares once again takes a peek towards B main from market, and this is a very common angle that enemies will almost always be pre-aiming when they peek. So generally, this would be pretty dangerous. However, Sean notices that there was a player tagged by the recon dart in B main and sees the enemy's outline running towards the entrance. So what does he do? He gets in position, and right when he thinks the player is about to be in front of his crosshair, he fires off 2 quick shots and falls back. Notice how Sean got an advantage here. He wasn't just holding the angle for no reason, he pushed up because he saw they were tagged by the recon and shot even before the target was on his screen, anticipating that they would peek him. This is the way you can get ahead of something like peeker's advantage because you don't even need to see the target to take advantage of pre-firing. In fact, that's the whole point of it. You're shooting before you see the target. The reason you do this is because this is not really a safe angle for you to hold. If you're just standing in a very common location, it's incredibly likely that you're going to get yourself killed. So instead of just standing there, you fire off a few shots and then quickly fall back before the enemies have a time to shoot back. Take a look at this other round from Aproto where he combines a couple of tactics that we talked about when taking duels. Notice how in this clip, Aproto lands a kill onto the enemy arena, and then after noticing the Viper was still jiggling him, he swings out from his original point of cover. The reasons he does this are because he wants to first of all receive his heal from the first kill, and second of all, throw off the Viper's pre-aim as she's jiggling him right now, so if he swung out, it would really throw her off. Now after swinging out, he also begins to pre-fire the Viper, expecting her to jiggle him again, timing his shots for when he thinks she might peek him. Valorant is all about getting these small advantages, taking an off angle when it's safe to do so, pre-firing your enemies when it's possible, and crouching in positions to throw off your enemy's aim, and playing positions that complement your opponents. The answer to the question, how do pros hold angles without dying, isn't necessarily they don't hold angles, it's that when they hold an angle, it's always one that will give them some sort of advantage. They can't just get away with holding every single angle in the game because some angles are just not smart angles to hold. And whether a specific angle is smart to hold or not is going to depend. Not all angles are good and not all angles are bad. It's situational. But the best advice I can try to provide to you is to try to keep in mind the positions that you play frequently in your games and the positions that you frequently die playing in your games. Because if you're holding an angle that gets you killed often, maybe stop holding that angle, or try to think about why it's getting you killed and how you can fix that. Maybe it's something as simple as standing a few feet to the left or crouching. You never know. If you want to explore all of these concepts a bit more in depth though, I highly recommend that you check out all the things that we have available on SkillCapped.com. It's by far the fastest way to improve at the game, and it's also backed by our rank improvement guarantee, so if you don't feel like you've gotten better at the game after using our service, you'll get your money back. No questions asked. Between in-depth pro analysis to Smurf commentaries where higher ranked players walk you through how to carry in your rank, we've got it all. So if you're interested, be sure to check out SkillCapped.com. Link in the description below. Creating this video was actually really helpful for me myself, realizing how the pro players are generally playing around the map. I have a habit of taking these early duels that I probably shouldn't be taking, and it was really eye-opening to see how little that actually happens for most of these pro players. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel down below. It really does help us out. And if you learned something, maybe consider sending this video to a friend. Maybe they can pick up a thing or two from it as well. As always, I'm the King Live, and we here at SkillCapped want to thank you all for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.